All right, let's go ahead and get started with this webinar. Today we're going to be covering the topic of DIY tabletop exercises to validate your incident response plan. Our objective here today is to help you fully understand what's going on with tabletops and the components of them and how they operate so that you can walk away being able to actually execute more effectively your own tabletop. So a few logistics. If you have any questions during the webinar, just go ahead and use the Q&A tool in the Zoom webinar platform. We'll address those questions as they happen, but we also do have a section saved at the end for answering all the questions all at once and being able to dive deep into them. After the webinar, we're going to do post-processing, and we'll shoot this out within 24 hours of the event. So a little bit about RedLeg. We are hosting this webinar today. RedLeg is a full-service cybersecurity firm based out of Chicago. We've been around since 2008. We're veteran-owned, and we take confidence and pride instilling the same confidence in our clients and partners. We're innovative engineers, thoughtful leaders, and proactive problem solvers dedicated to delivering guidance, service, and solutions that perform, evolve, and protect. Our three main areas of service are advisory services, managed security, and penetration testing. And a little bit about our speaker today. We'll be hearing from Andre Zielinski. He's been with RedLeg for a number of years. Andre has a master's in electrical engineering, more than 15 years of information security experience in management and consulting. He's worked with companies of all sizes in finance, healthcare, pharmaceutical, legal, pretty much you name it, he's done it. He's our go-to guy here in the office. He's pretty funny, so definitely enjoy the program, and I'll let him take it away.
Thank you, Away. Thanks again, Justin, for introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is a pretty interesting topic. We will try to make it as entertaining as we can and as useful as we can, too. So what we will be covering today, here is the agenda slide. We will talk about when and where do we start, common pitfalls to avoid, success criteria, preparing for the exercise, scenarios, and injects. So welcome again, and let's start. So let's talk about the purpose of exercise. One of the things that we run in pretty frequently is when we discuss potential tabletop exercises with the companies, with the clients, people usually don't fully understand that to have a productive tabletop exercise, you need to have fully prepared incident response plan for your organization, because there is no point of conducting tabletop exercise if there is no incident response plan in place. When you're conducting a tabletop exercise, what you are actually doing, you're validating your incident response plan. So this is the purpose of the exercise. Nothing else, nothing more. So what we are doing, again, we are validating your incident response plan. And we'll cover those things a little bit further down in the slides. So what objectives do we have when we conduct a tabletop exercise? So first of all, we need to understand roles and responsibilities during the incident, right? So when a disaster strikes, and knock on wood, it should not happen to your organization, but if disaster strikes, we need to know our responsibilities. Every team member, if you have, for example, a formal CERT team in your organization, every team member needs to understand their responsibilities, his or her responsibilities, and what they're supposed to do during the incident, right? So we are also looking to make the best use of the tools and resources that our organization has. So when we are conducting the tabletop exercise, we need to keep in mind what toolbox you have and what tools are available to you to work and to respond to an incident or data breach so that you are fully effective, right, in your response. And another thing that is really important, right, at the crisis time, you need to make decisions. And the purpose of the tabletop exercise, one of the main purposes of the tabletop exercise is to practice your decision-making process so that we are not stuck in endless discussions. We are able to make decisions that will help us to contain and eradicate incident as fast as possible. So let's talk a little bit about the roles of people who take part in the exercise, right, in the tabletop exercise. And you can compare tabletop exercise to a play to some extent. This is why we always have participants, players. So those are people who represent the majority of the participants, right, the players. They typically are playing the same roles that they have within organization. Sometimes, depending on scenario, you may have different roles assigned to people who actually are not performing those roles in real life, but you try to keep those roles as close to real life responsibilities as possible. So, participants, players, as we call them, they respond to the situation presented based on their knowledge of the incident response plan, existing policies, procedures, deploy technology, and insights, right? We talked a little bit about the incident response plan already, but one of the things to keep in mind is that the incident response plan typically works in conjunction with existing policies and procedures in your organization. So people who are part of your incident response team should be intimately familiar with the other documents, other governing documents of your organization. Facilitators are typically a team member with the advanced knowledge of security expertise. We are talking here about do-it-yourself exercises, so you will select a team member who has the best knowledge of your of security, of cybersecurity in your organization. Facilitator is very important role, right? Because this is probably similar to a moderator in a webinar, or this is a person who guides those conversations and tries to keep people focused. So usually during those exercises, there are tons of distracting conversations that may come up. So facilitator's role is to make sure that people are sticking to scenarios, that discussions are focused and result in good decisions. Observers, as you can probably understand, right, that players and participants are pretty busy working on the incident scenario. Facilitator is guiding them through this incident scenario, so there should be somebody who is observing what is actually happening during the tabletop exercise. So responsibilities of the observers are typically to take notes, and they need to pay, as you can see highlighted in this slide, they need to pay particular attention to how the proceedings when they take notes, they need to to note how the proceedings highlight communication gaps. So it is important. Communication is one of the most important parts of the tabletop exercise. So you will probably have representatives from desktop support team, from a team that manages servers. You may have people who support your cloud infrastructure. So observers are actually noting how those teams interact with each other during the exercise. And data collectors typically are people who would record all players' responses. You can have, for example, audio recording during your tabletop exercise, but typically a data collector would be somebody who actually is able to record, like you don't need full audio recording, but you need to make sure that responses of the players are recorded. So somebody who helps you with this task during the exercise. So about tabletop exercise as a part of the incident response and training. So this is what next section talks about, right? So if you look at Incidents Handler's Handbook that is published by Sense Institute, this handbook typically lists several phases as a foundation of the effective incident response, right? You have preparation, you have identification, containment, eradication, and recovery. And tabletop exercise falls on the preparation phase as you're preparing to be effective in your incident response. So by definition, right, cyber incident response team, CERT, training should be conducted on a regular basis, and it is a critical element of the process of developing ability to handle incident properly. training allows CERT members to know how to perform their duties during an incident. So that's according to, again, to SENS Institute Incident Handlers Handbook. Common pitfalls. Again, this seminar, as you would know, is focusing on conducting your own tabletop exercises. At the same time, we do conduct those for our clients, and those are pitfalls that we have observed during the real life tabletop exercises. So the first one we already mentioned is that there is absolutely no point to conduct a tabletop exercise if your incident response plan is not ready and approved. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind as security practitioners, as people who are responsible for the incident response and incident handling, is that if you have a document that you put together, but this document was not approved by the company management, this pretty much makes it a draft and not a working document. So documents need to be put together, your incident response plan needs to be formulated, and it has to be approved by the company management. Another typical pitfall is that what we see frequently happening in organizations, somebody prepares the incident response plan, it may get approved, so you now have incident response plan published, approved in your organization, but pretty much there is a minimum knowledge of what is in that incident response plan. Even if people have reviewed it during the preparation phase, and typically when you work on your incident response plan, you want to have different teams contributing to that incident response plan, so the document that you prepare as a result pretty much covers or has input from all parts of your organization, IT and non-IT, right? In this case, what happens, like if people even reviewed it at the preparation stage, they may have forgot the content of it, and sometimes they haven't read it at all. We know people's attitude towards documentation. Frequently, they try to ignore the lengthy documents, but this is something that we need to keep in mind, that people who are coming to your tabletop exercise, they need to refresh their knowledge of the incident response plan. There is no point coming to the tabletop exercise and trying to read your incident response plan on the fly. Another pitfall that typically happens is that when we as IT folks are not fully prepared to conduct a tabletop exercise with a company leadership. So this is why we typically recommend that the first tabletop exercise need to take place specifically for IT teams. And once we are ready to have a full-blown tabletop exercise with the company leadership, with organization leadership, to conduct the second tabletop exercise. We don't want to look lost. We don't want to look ineffective in front of our leadership. Sorry, organization leadership, company leadership. So that's why we want to be prepared. And the best way to prepare is to conduct initial IT-only tabletop exercise and then to get management involved. Another thing that happens in the tabletop exercises that we facilitate, this depends on the management style of the specific company, right? But what we are seeing sometimes is that conversation is hijacked by the management. And the way it happens is that you work through the incident, you look at the injects, you discuss your response, and then the management starts questioning effectiveness of IT organization and its processes in general. So why our help desk is working like this? Why don't we have tickets assigned to those people and so on? So this is typical. Usually leaders are selected by organization based on their leadership qualities. Sometimes it can be distracting here. Sometimes it can prolong and make your tabletop exercise more painful than it needs to be. Those are some things to keep in mind. And a couple more for your knowledge from our experience. Discussions need to be documented. So we talked about the roles. So there is no point, again, to have an exercise and don't have results documented. Another pitfall is typical, again, for us IT folks, is that tabletop exercise is not a threat hunting exercise. So we are validating our processes in a response to an incident. We don't want to be drowned in technical details. So we don't want to discuss specific checkbox in a configuration screen of our anti-malware tool, right? So we want to know our capabilities of our tools that help us fight incidents and data exfiltration, but we don't want to get drowned in those technical details. Time allocation is also very important in that sense that you don't want to have too little time because you won't be able to achieve your goals. Having too much time will result in allocating too much time will result in limited effectiveness of the exercise, because after a certain period of time, people get tired. They cannot think as clearly as initially, right? So there is optimal from our experiences to limit it to about 4 hours. We all have IT responsibilities. We can be paged if systems go down. So when you are selecting a day and time for your tabletop exercise, try to minimize possible distraction for members of your incident response team who will be taking part in this exercise. So make sure that there are no meetings scheduled. Typically, it's not a good idea to schedule those tabletop exercises Monday morning when people come back to the office, and there are usually reports about systems being down and any malfunctioning of the system. So plan exercise carefully, select the day with the typically less load, make sure that people are not booked for any meetings, and have them dedicate those 4 hours, if you decide to go with 4 hours, completely to the exercise. So what are success criteria? Again, something that we learned from our experience conducting those exercises. First of all, when you observe people, players that take part in the incident response in the tabletop exercise, you should see them referencing the incident response plan. Because what you're doing, again, and sorry for repeating this so many times, but this is the goal of this exercise that we are conducting. We are validating our incident response plan. So when people during the tabletop exercise are looking through the incident response plan, when they're catching some inconsistency, is perfect, because this will help to improve your incident response plan. So if people are continuously referencing IR plan, that's great. And as we say that when we go through the tabletop exercise, we are able to discover deficiencies, and they will help to improve your incident response plan. Typically, a couple things that we see with the incident response plans is that they're either too detailed or not detailed enough, right? If your incident response plan has tons of diagrams that you are trying to trace with your finger while you are taking part in this tabletop exercise, that probably tells you that something wrong with that layout, and you may want to simplify things like that. As you know, probably you had it tons of times, right, that everything needs to be measurable and quantifiable. So success criteria for us and for you when you conduct those exercises is that you come out of the exercise with the specific improvements for your incident response plan. And another factor that is extremely important for IT guys, because what we want to do is we want to demonstrate our capabilities to the company leadership, to make sure that the company leadership comes out of this exercise confident that we are able to handle incident response. We are able to handle security incidents as an IT organization. So a couple additional ones for your knowledge, right? So tabletop exercise typically, and that's the purpose of those, involves different teams. So there are, as we talked about it a little bit ago, so definitely you want to have the first one IT only, but when you start conducting the full-blown exercises, you should have somebody from your legal department, you should have somebody from, for example, from your marketing, because marketing typically handles communication. In case of the incident. So you want your team members to know what are their responsibilities. So if as a result of a tabletop exercise, you have improved communication with non-IT teams, this is perfect too, because then you can share responsibilities, and then IT doesn't make mistakes, as for example, telling a third party that we had a data breach bypassing official communication channels. This is a part of the tabletop exercise. Communication is important in case of the incident. Productive hot wash. Hot wash is typically a session that happens at the end of the tabletop exercise, and we want it to be productive. Why we do it right away after the tabletop exercise? We want fresh impressions. So days go by, and after a couple of days, we may forget certain details of our conversations and certain things that we wanted to improve. So when we have a hot wash immediately after the tabletop exercise, it allows us to pinpoint what was nice, what was good, what went wrong, and document those things. And another purpose of the tabletop exercises, and you see those two smiley faces here, those are indirect ones, but they may help you in your daily life, right? So I haven't seen yet an IT or a company that has unlimited security budget. So what is good in a case of a tabletop exercise, when you highlight shortcomings in your resources and tools and the budgets, this may help you to get attention from your company leadership and may help you increase your budget dedicated to incident response in the near future. And another criteria that we consider to be important is once people leave the tabletop exercise, they should feel exhausted. If they didn't dedicate their time, efforts, 100% to the exercise, then we didn't conduct it in a proper way. So what do you need to do to prepare for an effective tabletop exercise? You need to use your knowledge of your cyber defenses, right? So when you come up to an exercise, you need to know what you have in place to protect your organization. You also need to know what are the weaknesses in your defenses. Again, no one has 100% fail-proof IT security systems. Knowing those strengths and weaknesses will allow you to come up with a realistic scenario that will demonstrate how, for example, a bad actor is penetrating your systems. When you're preparing a tabletop exercise, right, you need to keep scenario as close to your chest as possible. Same as a book with the plot, right? You want limited number of people to take part in the scenario development. So when you are conducting a tabletop exercise, participants do not know what happens next. So this allows exercise to be similar to what happens in the real life, because you don't know what the bad actor will do next, or which symptoms or events you will be observing next. Validating your participant list, right? You don't grab people and pull them into a tabletop exercise to achieve a certain number of participants, right? If you don't say, okay, we will do 10 people, so let's find out whom we can pull into this exercise. You're focusing specifically on your core, and your core will be a computer incident response team or cyber incident response team, whatever way you call it, and then you add additional participants to the people who will be participating in the exercise. And as we mentioned already, conduct IT-only exercise first to get confidence and experience. We already mentioned select the day and time. Just to reinforce it, it is extremely important to have time allocated and day allocated where there will be minimum distractions for the participants of the exercise. Remind them to review the incident response plan before the exercise. Send them a couple emails. Make sure that before the exercise they have read through and they have familiarity with what is in your incident response plan. Do not plan for more than 5-6 hours. As I mentioned, that typically it would be 4 hours of the exercise itself. You would have some breaks. You want to have breaks because, again, people need to answer the emails and so on. So typically you will do injects, and the number of injects that you will be doing about 4 or 5 injects. And between the injects, you will be taking breaks. So active part of the exercise would be probably about 4 hours, and then you will need additional time for breaks and to conduct a hot wash session. So that's from the point of view of how you deal with the timing and resources during the exercise. So what you need to know when you're developing scenarios, right? Again, two main components of your incident response exercise, right? Tabletop exercise is, first of all, you need incident response plan and you need a scenario. Scenario is created by you. You need to make it real. So keep in mind the challenges your organization faces. Know what incidents you already have handled in your organization and use them as a basis for your scenario. Also know what are the threats for your specific industry. So if you are in a financial industry, probably your threats will be a little bit different. Threats that your organization is facing will be a little bit different than those that organizations in the biosciences industry would be facing. So again, the key word here is real. So knowledge of the threats to your specific industry helps in creating an incident response tabletop exercise scenario. Draw inspiration from a good sites on the internet, right? You're probably all aware of Crabs on Security and other sites. So you can use those. You can use Verizon Yearly Report to find out what are the main trends in the data breaches and use this information again as a basis of your scenario. And one of the most important parts on this slide is we preach that there is no general security. If you are securing your organization, what you need to do is you need to determine what your crown jewels are, whether it's non-public personal information for financial industry, right? Whether it's credit card data, whether it's intellectual property. So this is part of your information security program. When you define your information security program, you're focusing on those crown jewels. And it is absolutely logical to focus on those in your scenario when you're planning incident response, when you're conducting a tabletop exercise. Typical scenarios, right? Ransomware. I'm sure by now everyone is familiar what it does and how much people need to pay to get their data back in case they didn't have defenses in place. Data breach exfiltration, malicious insiders activity. So those are scenarios that can be worked around, that you can provide content for and use for your tabletop exercise. And this is pretty much it. So Justin, let's open it up for question.
Yep, again, please use the Q&A tool in the Zoom platform and we'll take some questions. All right, question one is, are security incident response tabletop exercises mandated by regulations?
So typically, and this is a good question, right? Typically, there are no regulatory mandates specifically for the organization conducting, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4 tabletop exercises during a year. There are indirect requirements, and this typically, like to give you an example, New York DFS, right, which is New York Department of Financial Services, has implemented special regulatory requirements for financial companies that conduct business in the state of New York. And one of the requirements for those financial companies, right, that provide those financial services is that they have a fully developed and validated incident response plan. And as we talk through here, right, we know that unless we have validated our incident response plan, there is no way we can make sure that it really works unless we conduct those tabletop exercises. So be prepared to see that you won't find any direct mandate saying that well, this should be conducted in a certain specific way, but you will see requirements that talk about incident response plan being in place and validated. Another interesting fact that happened recently, it happened actually in June, and this is the closest to mandated requirement. There was a new rule published by Federal Energy Regulatory Commission called FERC. It's a commission in charge of critical infrastructure resources in the United States. So based on that rule, companies that are involved in this critical infrastructure should be conducting a paper drill or tabletop exercises at least once per every 15 calendar months. So this is the closest we saw recently to mandating actually specific number of the tabletop exercises conducted and making sure that those take place.
Right. Second question is it possible for your first tabletop exercise to be less than 4 hours?
It is possible. Again, you are always balancing your availability. So duration will be in direct relationship with the scenario that you're building. Scenario will include the injects. So when you are building the scenario and injects, if you are able to condense them and have achieve required goals, then yes, possible. But typically, again, from our experience, you would stick with sometime around 4 hours exercise itself and about 4 or 5 injects. We find that optimal, but again, each organization is different, and you should be able to be productive in less time.
Right. Question 3: how often should you conduct a tabletop exercise?
This is a function, like if we talk about mathematics, right? This is a function of human memory and muscle memory, whatever you call it. If you conduct them too frequently, what happens, you can face fatigue. People will get annoyed by doing them too frequently. If they don't take place on a regular basis, you have other possibility, right? People forget the content of the incident response plan. And after a period of time when you're not practicing those, if something happens, everyone will be scrambling to remember what we need to do. I would say that if you are in a financial industry or industry that deals with personal identifiable information, you probably saw the latest news on Equifax penalties, right? And about the penalties that Facebook will be paying for the personal information breaches and handling of the personal information. So I would say in where you deal with personal data, I would recommend at least to conduct those probably 4 times a year. In this case, you have about 3 months in between them, and people are not too overloaded with those exercises. And at the same time, you keep your knife sharp. Your organization is aware of the incident response plan. Your incident response plan is continuously improved.
All right. Question 4. Is the information security officer or chief information security officer simply to present the scenario, then the team controversially plays out the response, or does the ISO, CISO need to lead them through the entire process?
And this comes to the role of facilitator. If you remember, facilitator is the role of the person who leads discussions, presents the injects during the conversation. Depending on the size of your organization, if you have a pretty small security team, your CISO, right, maybe a person who is working on scenario, maybe a person who is creating those injects. It's quite possible because not all organizations have fully staffed security teams. So in this case, yes, that would be a person who will be combining a role of the CISO and facilitator. At the same time, there are benefits of splitting facilitator and CISO roles because you, as a part of your incident response plan, your CISO has specific responsibilities that he or she have to carry on during the exercise. So it is good to have somebody facilitating the exercise, and your CISO in this case, again, if your organization size allows for that, and your CISO is taking part in the incident response activities during the exercise.
Right. Similar question. As a facilitator, how much should you be steering the conversation? Example, should you have talking points for your incident, or just let the incident itself play out and let the participants talk?
It is a very active role. I, on my side, right, take part when we facilitate those tabletop exercises for our clients. Typically, we have a team that supports those tabletop exercises, and from time to time, I take a role of facilitator. So I'm intimately familiar with how those things develop and how they proceed during the exercise. So it is a very active role. You don't want just to show, give away, for example, printouts of the inject. You don't want to show just the slide for the specific inject, right? That says, okay, this has happened. For example, we have malware outbreak on 100 virtual desktops. What you want to do is, when you're preparing for the tabletop exercise as a facilitator, what you want to do is you want to have a list of follow-up questions that is specific to each inject. So when the inject is displayed to participants and they start conversation, you're listening to that conversation. At the same time, you already have questions prepared for this specific scenario that you are practicing. So if we talk as an example about malware outbreak, so you want, one of the things that you continuously want to ask during the tabletop exercise to catch the transition moment from the event to the incident is, so we have this inject, this is what has happened. So how do we treat this? Is this an event or an incident? So when we, as the exercise develops, right, and we come to a conclusion that it's an incident, right, another thing that facilitator should be asking the audience, and typically organization has incident severity levels defined. When we already have determined during the exercise that this is an incident, one of the things that facilitator will be asking, so what severity level of the incident is it now? Do we expect it to become worse? How we can confirm that incident is limited, and so on. So extremely active role. Be prepared. You show slides with the injects to participants. At the same time, you have your list of questions, specific questions, probing questions prepared for each inject that you use to guide conversation after each inject being shown to people.
Great. Can you describe what an inject is again?
Yeah, so for example, like if we talk about malware, right, typical development in each organization is if you have an outbreak, let's say you use any malware protection systems, those systems will notify you in case of, let's say, one user machine having malware detected, which typically, again, depending on the user machine, right? If it's somebody in finance, it may change your severity level, but typically it would be an event that happened. And then another inject can be, you now have the same malware detected on 50 machines. So this definitely changes the perception, definitely changes the impact. And those are kind of, for example, two injects that you would use in the malware exercise.
Great. How many scenarios should you have during the exercise?
Typically one scenario with several injects. So optimum number that I mentioned, so you have one scenario, 4 or 5 injects dedicated for that scenario, as a part of that scenario.
Great, and I think our last question, please definitely type in your remaining questions you might have. Andre, do you have a video link to an example of an IR tabletop exercise?
Not that I have one readily available, but you will see in the further slides that Justin will be presenting is that we are planning to have a workshop, and this will be better than video link. We will have an exercise where our Red Lake team will pretty much play out a tabletop exercise with pretty interesting scenarios. So please stay tuned, and I'm sure Justin and our marketing organization will be sharing with you information on how to attend that workshop.
Yes, I will. But in the meantime, we've got one more question. Two more questions. Should all participants be in the same room, or can some people be remote via video?
Preferably in the same room, but again, it depends on your organization, right? If you have a multi-site setup where your team members, so let's say you have headquarters in New York, you have IT organization in Chicago, you have your legal department in Dallas, so you, and all of us are balancing costs versus results, right? So unlikely your management will pay for the trips of everyone to single location to take part of the exercise. So try to keep everyone in one room. If not possible, a video bridge is perfect. So seeing people, interacting visually with them helps during the exercise. Having people just dialed in usually is not that productive.
Great. And potentially last question. Do you have any experience with gamifying the tabletop? Example, rolling dice for outcomes. Are these any better or worse?
We haven't used, let's call it technique like that in our exercises. Again, one of the things that we are, and trying not to sound like control people, right? People who overemphasize control. So we try to control the flow of the exercise, and we recommend you do the same when you conduct your own tabletop exercises. So introducing certain level of probability or unexpected during the exercise is done through your inject. So haven't done that. Maybe there is a value, not sure about that.
Great. That covers it for all of our questions. Thank you for everybody for so much interaction there. That was great. All right, to wrap this up, one, thank you everybody for coming, but two, as Andre alluded to, mid-August, August 15th, we are hosting in downtown Chicago a live tabletop demonstration and workshop on incident response preparedness. Our team here is working diligently to fully understand specific injects that are all about a situation, a case that we believe everybody could be related to. And we're going to be performing a live in-person tabletop. You'll get a little bit of a walkthrough, sort of like what you saw today, but you'll also get to see the conversations and the dialogue unfold theoretically as they would amongst your own team, should you host your own or should you have somebody facilitate it. So if you do have more interest and want to see that, you can go to redleg.com/events. It's a free event. It's from 11:30 to about 4:30, and we'll be covering quite a bit, and it should be a really great day, a really great event. So I will send that link out. I will send the link to this video. We've got a couple more documents with some sample injects and some more FAQ and information to help you fully digest and understand a tabletop to all in all to help you stay stronger and be prepared for should something happen someday. So again, thank you, Andre. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you guys for attending. Thank you.